Hi everyone, and welcome to the final video in my 2021 TBR series. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you all of the horror books that I hope to get to sometime this year, although unlike all of the other videos in the series where I only mentioned 10 books per genre, in this video I actually have 15 horror books that I hope to get to this year, and the reason why I have so many is because for some reason, surprisingly, horror is one of my least read genres, and that's surprising because it's one of my favorite types of movies to watch. So I don't know why I'm drawn to actually pick the books up, which is why there were so many on my Goodreads TBR that I couldn't narrow it down to just 10 books, but for some reason I never actually pick them up. Not sure why, I'm just as confused as you. But I want this year to be the year where I actually do read horror books. So I've got 15 to share with you. I've got lots of different kinds of horror because there are so many different subgenres in this category, and for the most part I feel like I know what I like when it comes to movies, but I don't know if what I like in movies is going to translate the same in books. So my favorite horror subgenre for movies might not be the same in books. For instance, I love home invasion films, but I don't know if that kind of horror is going to translate well for me when reading it. That being said, I don't think any of the books on this list are actually home invasion type stories. So if you know of any books that feature that, let me know in the comments because I'd like to read them and see if I do enjoy it in book form also. As per usual, I've got all of them written down on my phone, so if you see me reading off my phone, that is why. But without further ado, let's just jump into the 15 books on my TBR. So of course, the first two that I have are Stephen King, because it wouldn't be a horror TBR without a little bit of Stephen King. First up, we have It, which was on a lot of TBRs in 2020. I really wanted to read this book last year, and I did actually get 50 pages into it, and then I think I just got really intimidated by the size of it, for obvious reasons, but also the writing I struggled a little bit with, because if you've read King, you know that he tends to have very descriptive writing, which in books like The Shining, which is my favorite Stephen King book, I feel like the descriptive writing works so well in that story. Like, I love how atmospheric it is and how deep we dive into the characters, but in this book it just wasn't working as well for me. But I'm hoping when I pick it up sometime this year I will be more in the mood to pick it up, if that makes sense. I don't know. I really want to love this book, but I struggled with the first 50 pages. And then the second Stephen King book I have is called Desperation, and all that I really know about this one is that it is another huge book. A lot of commitments here, but it's set in a mining town in Nevada, I believe, and that is all I know. The town is called Desperation, and I assume something sinister is going down there, but I really love the cover of this book, and it even continues onto the back. There's like a little wolf-like creature, so I think this is either like monster or creature horror, not really sure, but I'm looking forward to it. And those are actually the only two books on this list that I actually own, so now jumping into all of the books that I will either have to purchase or get from the library. So first up we have House of Leaves. This book, I don't know a lot about it, which you will see a lot in this video. I don't know a lot about these books, but I do know that we're following a family that moves into a house that is bigger on the inside, is what I feel like I remember reading about. Sounds like the TARDIS, but I think it's gonna probably be a bit more sinister than that. All that I really know about this book is that people either really love it or really hate this book. So I'm hoping I'll be one of the people that love it. The way that people seem to describe it is that it's really weird. Like, it's one of those books where it's like, if you like really weird books, you'll like this book, but also I feel like there are different kinds of weirds that people can like, so there's still a possibility, while I would say I love weird books, there's still a possibility I won't like this book. And I actually really wish I had a copy to show you, because this book is formatted really strangely. Like, sometimes their words are written in a weird way, or like half the page is blank and there's only like a little line of stuff on the top. It's hard to explain without actually being able to show you the book, but it's formatted really strange, and it just seems to overall be a weird book. So I want to know what it's all about. Next up, we have a book called A House at the Bottom of a Lake by Josh Malerman, who you might recognize as the author of Bird Box, which I have read. I haven't read a lot of horror in my time, but Bird Box is one of the ones that I have read, and it falls into the same thing that happens with a lot of the horror that I've read, where I really like the concept of it, but then when I actually read the book, I'm not as impressed with it. But because I still really liked the concept of Bird Box, I think there's still a chance that I could enjoy this author's other works. So that's why I want to pick up this book. It's actually pretty short as well. I think it's less than 200 pages. And from what I understand about this book, we're following a couple. I think they're 17 years old or something, like a young couple. They go on a date where they're canoeing on a lake and they find a house at the bottom of the lake. And I think when I remember reading a synopsis was something like, well, the couple plays house under the waves. Even though it's empty doesn't mean no one's home or something like that. So I don't know that I fully understand what is going to be going on in this book, but it sounds really intriguing, and like I said, it's pretty short. So I would like to pick this up and see if maybe Josh Malerman is still an author that I might enjoy reading from. Next up, we've got Mexican Gothic, which has been pretty popular on BookTube lately, so I'm sure you probably heard about this book. From what I understand, we are following our main character called Noemi. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but she receives a frantic letter from her cousin who was just recently married, and so our main character goes to stay with them and finds something very strange about the house slash the family that her cousin married into. Once again, I'm a little vague on the plot, which is how I like to go into my horror books anyway, but it sounds really interesting. This is another one where a lot of people really liked it, but then I also saw some people a little underwhelmed with it. I also feel like it's been a while since I've read like a gothic kind of novel, and I actually really like gothic novels, even if they're not like horror books, which seems to be how people are kind of not enjoying this book, is that they're going into it expecting it to be like a terrifying kind of horror, where it is more like, I think, that kind of atmosphere of gothic horror, if that makes sense. I don't know if it does, so I'm gonna move swiftly on to the next book, which is another book that has been described as just a weird book, and that is Bunny. I feel like I first heard about this book on Books and Lala's channel, and she really liked it, and for the most part, I don't really know what this book is about. The description on Goodreads is like we're following a girl who I think gets into this group that is not, I don't know if it's like a sorority, but it's like something similar to that. It's this group of girls that call themselves the Bunnies, and I think they conduct these like weird experiments or something like that. A lot of people that have talked about this book have said to just go into it blind, so that's kind of what I'm doing. However, I did hear a certain something about this book that isn't mentioned in the synopsis on Goodreads, so I really want to tell you about it because that is what intrigued me to really read this book, was this little something extra that somebody told me about this book, but I don't know if it's technically a spoiler or not. So if you're like really sensitive to spoilers, just mute like the next 10 seconds of this video. So what I heard was that these girls that call themselves the Bunnies have some kind of power to transform bunnies into men, but sometimes it doesn't always go right. And for some reason, I was like, sounds fascinating, I want to pick it up. So maybe if you stuck around to hear what I just said, that will intrigue you enough to pick this book up also. Or maybe it's just me that wants to read a book about that. I don't really know. Moving swiftly on again to a book called Horrid. This was one of my most anticipated releases of last year, I think, and of course I never got around to reading it because I'm always 5 million steps behind everybody else. But in this book, we're following our main character called Jane, who moves with her mom to her mom's childhood family home, like where her mom grew up, and she is having some trouble fitting in with like the new school and stuff that she's going to. But I think the horror side of this book is that she discovers some dark secrets in this childhood home of her mother's, specifically this locked off storage room that turns out to actually be like an untouched child's bedroom. So it sounds really interesting. I feel like I remember it saying fans of Agatha Christie would enjoy this book, although it might have been something else, I can't remember. But I just know when this book first came out, before it even had a synopsis, it had like a, you know, if you're fans of this, then you would like this book. And I can't remember what it was, but it was something that I really liked. So I thought I would really like this book. This is the most unhelpful video ever because I can't remember half of the reasons I wanted to read these books, but I just know that I did. Like, I have very strong feelings about these books, even though half the time I don't even know what they're about. Next book on my list is The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling. This is probably one of my most anticipated releases of this year. It doesn't come out until October, but I am so excited for this book, and I really want to do it justice, so I'm actually going to read you the synopsis off of Goodreads because there's no way that I would be able to just explain it well off the top of my head, and I'm so excited for this book, and I want to sell it well, even though it could be garbage because I haven't read it yet, but nonetheless, this is what the synopsis said on Goodreads. Practical, unassuming Jane Shoringfield has done the calculations and decided that the most secure path forward is this: a husband in a marriage of convenience who will allow her to remain independent and occupied with meaningful work. Her first choice, the dashing but reclusive Dr. Augustine Lawrence, agrees to her proposal with one condition: that she must never visit Lindridge Hall, his crumbling family manor outside of town. Yet on their wedding night, an accident strands her at his door in a pitch-black rainstorm, and she finds him changed. Gone is the bold, courageous surgeon, and in his place is a terrified, paranoid man. One who cannot tell reality from nightmare and fears Jane is an apparition come to haunt him. By morning, Augustine is himself again, but Jane knows something is deeply wrong at Lindridge Hall and with the man she has so hastily bound her safety to. Set in a dark mirror version of post-war England, Starling crafts a new kind of gothic horror from the bones of the beloved canon. And then, if that didn't sell me enough, this next part: this Crimson Peak-inspired story assembles, then upends, every expectation set in place by Shirley Jackson and Rebecca and will leave readers shaken, desperate to begin again as soon as they are finished. So if you didn't know, I am such a big fan of the movie Crimson Peak, which I was already getting the vibe of it when I was initially reading the synopsis for the first time, but then hearing that that is actually what is it inspired by is just like everything that I wanted. And then it mentioned Rebecca in it also, which is another one of my favorite movies and books, so I am just so excited to read this book. I've definitely hyped myself up way too much, but I'm hoping that it will live up to my expectations because I'm so excited. Also the cover, but we don't judge books by their covers here. Next up, we've got Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. I put a couple of his books on my thriller TBR, but this one I've heard is more on the side of horror than a thriller, and this is actually one of the ones that I am most anticipating out of all of his books. And basically the synopsis of the story very much gives me The Haunting of Hill House, the TV show vibes, because we're following our main character who grew up in a house that was supposedly haunted, and then I think her father wrote a book about the hauntings that went on at their house, and it kind of gave them and the house a bad rep in the town. Like, I don't think the town really liked the fact that her father wrote this book. And then as she gets older, I think she kind of dismisses the idea of everything that was happening at the house was due to like hauntings and stuff like that. And then I guess her father dies and leaves her the house, and then she has to go back there and, you know, secrets start to happen. So it definitely feels like a Haunting of Hill House kind of inspired story, which I really like that TV show, so I'm intrigued to pick this book up. The next book on my list is called Tender is the Flesh, and this is a dystopian horror, which of all of the subgenres of horror, I do feel like dystopian might be one of the creepiest, just because I feel like it is one of the ones that is most realistic to actually happen, sadly. But in this book, we are living in a future society where there is this disease that has infected all animal meat, so we can't eat animal meat anymore, but now we can eat special meat, which is basically humans. Yeah, that's what's going on in this book. This is another one that it's not very long at all, so I'm really interested to see what this story is going to be all about and like what direction this book can possibly go in, but it sounds real interesting. So very excited for that one. So those are the 10 books that I most want to get to this year, although it felt like that went by really quickly, so I hope I didn't miss one accidentally. But now the next 5 books I'm just going to go over really quickly because I don't want this video to be too long, but these ones I do hope to get to this year, but if I don't, the other 10 are like my top priority on this list. So first up we have Near the Bone by Christina Henry. This comes out in April, and this is monster horror that is set on a secluded mountain. The next one on my list is Blood and Salt. This is YA horror, which I think this is one of the only YA horror on this list. I think maybe 1 or 2 of the other books might have been, but for the most part they're all adult. But this is YA, and this book is described as Romeo and Juliet meets Children of the Corn. I don't even know what to imagine this book is going to be like, but I feel like it's going to be good, so I want to read it. Then we've got The Library at Mount Char. This is fantasy horror, which I don't know anything about, except that I assume it's set in a library. That was all that I needed. Like a book about books, that's all I need to know that a book is about in order for me to want to pick it up. So that's that. Moving on. Second to last, we have Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews, I believe is the author. This is one of those books where, again, I don't know much about it at all, except that I think it's got something to do with incest. I feel like I remember that being associated with this book somehow. But the main reason I want to read this book is there seems to be an overwhelming amount of people that when they mention this book, they say, yeah, that was a book that I read when I was a kid or like a young teenager, and then they follow it up by saying, I should not have read that book when I was a kid. Probably because of the incest. But yeah, it was like a book that I don't know why I feel like so many people I hear have read it when they were younger and like they didn't realize what kind of a book that it was. So I want in to know what it's all about. But also, when people have read it now, they don't seem to like it at all. So I don't know what I'm really getting myself into. But it's also one of the ones where I feel like it's almost like a staple of the horror genre. Like this is one of those books where if it was a movie and you call yourself a horror fan, but then another horror fan hears that you haven't seen this movie, then you can't be considered a true horror fan because this is a staple and you have to have watched that to be considered a true horror fan. Did that make any sense? But that's how I feel like this book is, so I feel like I need to read it. And then the final book on my list is called Kill Creek by Scott Thomas. All that I really know about this book is we're following, I believe, 4 horror authors that are invited to spend Halloween night at this infamous abandoned haunted house, and then something like demonic or something's going on there. This, out of all the other ones, kind of just strikes me, and it could be the cover, I'm not sure, but I think something between the cover and the synopsis, it just strikes me as like, out of all of these books, the most like stereotypical kind of horror. Which isn't a bad thing. Like one would sometimes enjoy a good cheesy romance, I feel like this book is going to be whatever the equivalent of that is for the horror genre. Which that's a harsh way to judge this book maybe, but that's just what I feel. But I still am interested in reading it, obviously, otherwise it wouldn't be on this list. So yeah, those are all 15 books that I hope to get to sometime in 2021. If you have read any of these books, let me know in the comments which ones you enjoyed and that you think I should prioritize on this list. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!